Well, good afternoon, everyone. The H1B guy here, and today, the H1B guy live, August 2nd, 2023. And I'm joined by MobSquad's Arif Khimani and Lihan Zhu. And we're going to discuss the second H1B lottery that just occurred, as well as Neil's journey through failed lottery attempts and utilizing MobSquad to relocate to Canada. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and like this video so that I can continue to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention that H1B Guy offers a variety of consulting services. I help businesses and individuals solve complex work authorization issues in the recruitment process while bringing awareness to employment-based immigration benefits. If I can help you, please reach out. I'd love to hear how. And you can book an appointment directly with me via the h1bguy.com. Today's live stream is brought to you exclusively by MobSquad. Are you a technology professional facing U.S. work visa-related challenges? Don't leave your fate up to chance. Our partner, MobSquad, has a solution. Join the squad. And we'd also like to thank our partners, PERM-ads.com, as well as Syndesus and Path to Canada. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm joined by Arif Khimani, President, COO of MobSquad. Arif, I believe this is the third time now that you've been able to join me for a live stream. And, we always greatly value your insight into not only the H-1B visa here in the U.S., but as well as the GTS program and Pass to Canada that MobSquad provides. And very excited to join in Neil here with us today, who is a MobSquad employee, had previously worked in the U.S., experienced failed lottery attempt, and is a very high-skilled designer that now finds himself living and working in the U.S. So the timing couldn't be any better today for our live stream, and really excited to have these two individuals join me here today. So wanted to just jump right into it, Arif and Neil, and that is, last Thursday, July 27th, very early in the morning, WR Immigration kind of broke the news that USCIS was going to hold a second H-1B lottery. It was going to be announced pretty quickly. Later that afternoon, USCIS confirmed that they would hold a second H-1B lottery, in their words, soon. And I was pretty bullish in some of my content leading up to last week about my opinion on it. I didn't think there would be a second lottery, kind of based on the previous year as well as the number of registrations that they selected overall. However, as many of you loved to remind me, I was wrong on that, as USCIS then held a second H-1B lottery. I started receiving confirmations very early on Monday morning, which was July 31st, from numerous sources that the second random selection had been held and was completed, and registrations had been notified. And RF, you actually brought it to my attention because I'd missed this and I'd seen some data out there, but USCIS confirmed 77,600 additional registrations were selected in this kind of the second round, which brought the overall selections for fiscal year 2024 over 188,000. So let's get right to the biggest question of the hour, and that is, if I wasn't one of these 77,600 that was selected on Saturday or Monday, whenever the selection took place, what are my options if I'm an individual who may be facing an expiration or potentially going out of status? What are my options if I want to stay with my current employer?
Yeah, and thank you. That's very helpful context, and it's something that we can certainly help with, and I'll get into that. But even though the size of the second lottery was much bigger than I think we initially expected at 77,000, if you look at the number of eligible registrants, which was over 750,000, it still means that even with this selection, about 90% of the remaining candidates were still not selected in the second lottery. And about 75% overall were not selected. So your odds of being selected were still relatively low because the number of registrations was way higher than in any previous year. So while they, picked more in the second lottery, there's still 90% of people probably out there trying to figure out what to do with this day. So I mean, you're generally, I think, in one of three groups. So you're either on a STEM OPT visa, for example, and you have multiple chances at the lottery. And if this was your first or second chance, you may have an opportunity to take part in the lottery again next year or the year after even. But there's two groups that are, in a tough situation at this point. If it was your last attempt on a STEM OPT or an OPT visa, and you are basically only able to stay until that visa now expires, or if you were abroad and were hoping to use the H-1B lottery to come into the U.S., you're effectively unable to do so if you weren't selected at this point. And so options for that are, there are what we would like to call suboptimal options to stay in the U.S. if you happen to be there, which is to enroll in a day one CPT school, for example, where you can technically extend your stay because you're within an educational visa, but those can be costly, those can be time consuming, and it's hard to balance that with work and everything, and doesn't really guarantee your status long term. It just prolongs this potentially until the next lottery. But other options that we would like people to consider, obviously, is a path to Canada. So whether you are in the U.S. and can't stay, or abroad and couldn't get in, through MobSquad, we're able to get expedited work permits for those that are technology professionals, as well as several other engineering fields, within 4 to 6 weeks. And if you've seen an announcement recently in Canada, they have actually returned to expedited processing. So all of the backlogs that were there over COVID are now clear. And we have, I can speak from personal experience, successfully been able to get work permits over the last little while here in that 4-week time span. And so even if you have a tight deadline where you're in the US and you can't stay for very long, we would encourage you to reach out, because we can make that work within a short period of time. And the way that this works is we become your employer in Canada. You work on our payroll, on our benefits, with our company, out of our offices. You're part of our team. So you can continue to support that US-based company and provide them with technical services on an exclusive and long-term basis. So the company gets to keep working with you, you get to keep working with the company, and you get a path to Canada. And importantly, we can put you on a path to permanent residency within about a year, which is really, really different than the US system.
Yeah, and you do all of that through the global talent stream, which I want to make sure we clarify. I know we've talked about it many times over. I refer to it as GTS. Global talent stream is basically a temporary technical work permit in Canada. There are clearly defined fields or specialty occupations, as we like to refer to them as here. Arif, you and I talked about this back in January, some of the expansion of the fields, some of the engineering and categories that they added. But really, for on my audience and my target demographic, folks that consume my content here, a lot of which are in the tech and STEM space. So it falls right into the GTS. And one of the things that I've seen too, you talked about the processing, that I wanted to highlight again. When we first had you on this platform almost 2 years ago, it was almost 12 weeks to process the GTS. And then it was 8, and then we were 6, and now we're in this 4 to 6. So we all kind of a return to normalcy for the GTS platform and program and entry and gaining work authorization into Canada. To me, it's really, I think, from I'd say initiation to when somebody could physically be living and working in Canada. We used to talk about 60 days, Arif, but I think that feels more like probably 6 weeks now, which is 2 weeks less than, when we first started talking about it. So it can happen a lot quicker than I think a lot of folks anticipate or estimate. And I know the IRCC was very bullish on reducing processing times. And that was something that, we've seen them, go out into the public forums about. And, I know that that's something that you guys, with your unique partnership with the Canadian government, allows you to process, those cases in a much more expedited format. So I had Judy Husbands on with me back at the end of June, and we briefly discussed, some of the announcements that came out from the IRCC, one of them being this H-1B open work permit, H-1B OWP that Canada was opening up for 10,000 individuals beginning on July 16th. My understanding was that literally the number of applications within a matter of a couple of days far exceeded the availability. So kind of a similar question to the H1B lottery here, which is, if you were somebody who was interested in that H1B OWP, how can Mob Squad help those applicants that may have not been selected, or individuals that may have missed that application window, that might not have an employer who's looking to relocate them to Canada?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. So they announced that program on June 27th, along with a slew of other announcements, and it obviously got a lot of press. It opened, I believe, on July 16th, and within 48 hours, the entire allotment of 10,000 slots was completely filled and overfilled. So that program for specifically targeting H1B holders is now is basically closed in Canada for the time being. So it's been fully realized in terms of being able to fill it with folks. And so there's still a few options for those that are looking for a path to Canada. So obviously what we talked about at the top through Mob Squad is definitely one, where the global talent stream work permits that you mentioned are still available. It is an uncapped program and it runs year round. And so those that may have been eligible for the H1B program that was announced are almost certainly eligible for the global talent stream, because as you said, it covers almost all tech occupations. So software engineers, developers, web developers, data scientists, and as Neil will describe later, even designers as well, as long as they're digital designers. It's a pretty broad group, and they expanded it to other engineers as well, like civil engineers and electrical engineers and mining engineers as well. So it's a, it should cover basically those that had H1Bs. And so the most optimal path, if you want to do this, is to have a company that wants to work with you, whether it's your current company or a future company, because that makes that process a lot easier for us to then, go ahead and process everything. If that's not the case for you, we do have a talent roster as well that you can join. And so if you go to our website, there'll be a section just called Join Mob Squad, and there'll be 6 or 8 jobs that are always listed there that we're always intaking great candidates for. And if you kind of meet the criteria in terms of behavioral and technical screening, and if we're able to match your profile with clients that are interested in adding individuals to provide services, then that's another path in. So we'd encourage you to do that. Otherwise, if this doesn't work. And another path that is going to come, and I'll tease it here just because it hasn't been fully, all the details aren't fully out, but as part of that June 27th announcement, there were other employer-specific streams that were announced that would actually be LMIA exempt. So the details of those are actually supposed to come out before the end of this year, so I would anticipate in the winter. But we could potentially do a future webinar where they'll actually add paths that are beyond the H1B stream they announced and beyond the global talent stream that exists, including into a new potential area that would allow for up to 5-year work permits that would not require an LMIA. So there's some interesting things that are coming as well.
Wow. Yeah. And this is, I've covered it a lot, and, I've talked about it. I mean, clearly, Canada as a whole is all in on high skilled talent acquisition. You see that through their multiple streams, and these announcements where they're, again, very bullish on this. I did want to just emphasize one thing that, I've talked about. It's been a pretty consistent theme, not only here in the US, but as well as Canada. If you don't have an employer and you're looking to go through that Mob Squad talent, little slower burn right now. Hiring as a whole definitely still down, not only in Canada but here in the US. We look at new jobs added, the report that came out for June here in the US, number of new jobs added still relatively low. I do expect on the back half of the year that to pick up, not only here in the US but in Canada as well. So if your employer's not willing to relocate you, but you're looking to use a first-class organization like Mob Squad, a little patience on that end as you work through the recruitment process, I think is worth mentioning. I also just wanted to mention, I know there's a few questions, couple comments already in the chat. If you do have questions for Arif or for Neil as we work through this, please feel free to drop those, and of course I can into them as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the H1B Guy channel, like this video, make sure you have the bell click for notifications so that you're notified anytime we do go live, like we have here today on August 2nd, 2023. So wanted to turn the attention to you, Neil, and really appreciate you taking time to jump in here this afternoon. Can you share your story with us? Where are you originally from, and why did you initially come to the U.S.?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So I am from China. I came to US in 2015 for master degree, and at the beginning for architecture, and then I switched to tech. So for now, I'm working as a UX designer. The initial reason I came to US, it was basically because it had most of the high-ranking universities that I can pursue, and also it's gonna be everyone were pursuing schools in US and working there. Yeah.
So came to the U.S. to get your master's. Where'd you go to school?
I went to University of Michigan and got both
University of Michigan. Yep.
masters in architecture.
One of the largest alumni bases in the U.S. and, definitely what I'd say a top 25 school. So got your human factors UX master's degree. Is that right?
It's like science in information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Masters of Science, Information User Experience. Went on to an OPT, I assume, and started working here in the U.S.
Right. In 2019, I got my OPT, and then in 2020, I started with my STEM OPT for which expired till 2022 end of June.
So you had 3 years, 36 months once your OPT started. You were working as a full-time employee. How many H1B lottery attempts did your employer put you through?
Actually, I went through two in
Two.
the one for 2020 and 2021.
Okay.
So actually, I got the 2021 lottery, but actually the lawyer kind of messed that up and didn't really communicate that to me and my employer in US back then. And yeah.
So 2020 and 2021 was an interesting time frame for the lottery. It was when the electronic registration period and kind of that portal first started was in 2020. Two selections were held that year. Three were actually held in 2021. Ended up being selected, but due to some complications with the filing, application was not submitted, and so we're facing going out of status, I assume. So when did you realize you had a problem?
Oh, that was actually the May last year, which was only like 1 month from the due date of my STEM OPT. And that was really a horrible experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So realized you had a problem. I'm sure you went to one of two places, and that's either Google or YouTube. So how did you find out about MobSquad?
So it was also a long story, but let me try to keep that short. First, I reached out to friends who introduced me to some more reliable immigration lawyers in US. And then they worked with my former employer relocating me to Canada because at that time we thought my former company had a branch in Canada which can directly relocate me to. However, we realized that we couldn't due to the format of how our company worked in Canada. And then the US lawyer recommended MobSquad to us.
Okay, awesome. So did they connect you with MobSquad? Did you reach out on your own? Walk me through that process.
I think the lawyer, the US lawyer, introduced MobSquad to both me and my former employer. And I think the HR in my company reached out or like had a conversation with MobSquad at the beginning. And then maybe I'm actually not sure how long they have discussed about all this process. But
Mm-hmm.
I was introduced to MobSquad personally at the end of September.
Mm-hmm.
When I was already left US, I was staying in Mauritius for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I got introduced in the end of September, and we signed contract, I think on October 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And only like a week later, MobSquad helped me submitted the LIMIA.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think after a month, I submitted the work permit application, but that could actually be much faster for most of other cases. In my case, there were other complicated. But after I submitted that, within a month, I got the permit.
Awesome. So through all of this process, as you were introduced to Mob Squad and discussion of relocation of your current role and becoming an employee of Mob Squad, what was the most important thing for you through the entire process?
I think for me, it was actually the support from my US company and MobSquad. Like they were willing to have me going through the path of that MobSquad is providing,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and and then MobSquad has really done a very good job helping me relocating to Canada in a really
Mm-hmm.
fast path. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, the immigration company MobSquad is partnering with, they are also
Mm-hmm.
very responsive. They give me a like experience that is on the completely different end compared to what I had in US.
Mm. Yeah, I like to call it white glove service. Arif, we've talked about that a lot, not only with you, but with Graham and Judy this year. And when I had Mary Grace on earlier, we talked about how what makes Mob Squad unique is this white glove approach to you really uprooting and relocating your life, and how that can create a lot of anxiety, and how they have a proven track record. They've done this hundreds of times now, and so the format and the process to which they operate can help reduce that stress and anxiety on you, the employee. So let me ask you this question, and I think this is one that I always enjoy asking folks who have gone through the process with Mob Squad and have considered their options. And it's really kind of a two-pronged question, Neil, and that is, if you had to go back and do it all over again, what would you tell yourself before you came to the US? And then once you came to the US, as you realized that you needed to seek alternate solutions, what advice would you give to individuals who are considering this same path that you've gone down?
Uh, if I just so for the first question, if I time travel back to advise my younger self,
Yeah.
I would ask him to maybe consider pursuing a master's degree in Canada
Yeah.
as well,
Mhm.
because the immigration process here is much more friendly and smoother. And like even if I just going through the U.S. path, I would ask him to like be more cautious about the immigration lawyers. Just
Mhm.
don't trust them immediately.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and for the second question, I think the advice for people who might be like me or considering pursuing Canadian path, maybe is to kind of prepare earlier, like um, to have conversations with your company to see if they would like to support you, or like reaching out to Mob Squad
Mhm.
and get into the pool to see if there are other
Mhm.
employers that would like to go through that path. But also like just on a personal side, moving through the Canadian immigration program, one thing that I think was a little bit like notorious was that you have to take the English exams. So maybe prepare those and some mental preparation on that. But as long as you have worked in US in English-spoken countries, I think that is not a big deal.
Right, because there's a points associated with, you know, the command of the English language, and it's very important. That's a weighted scale that has a lot of value in the overall points when you look at permanent residency, and that's a great point, Neil. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, two things. One, about pursuing a master's degree in Canada. There's a lot of data out there about the last couple of years, where a lot of international students have specifically been choosing Canada over the US for the reasons that you just laid out. It's becoming one of the number one destinations for international students, kind of a 1A and B, if you will. When we look at US still dominates the overall volume, but the gap that's been closed in Canada for international students over the last couple of years is significant. And then the second thing you mentioned is having the conversation with your employer early on in the process and seeing if it's something that they would be open to considering. I think that's a really key. Transparency is key through all of this between you as the employee and your employer here in the US, and seeing if that is something that they would consider, because the cost of them losing you as an employee in a lot of cases is outweighed by their ability to relocate you using MobSquad as their employer of record in Canada. So I think it's something that a lot of US employers now are much more open to, this concept of nearshore parking. And I know MobSquad has multiple offices, Toronto, Vancouver, so it allows for different time frames depending on where your employer is when we look at geographic regions and time zones. So really appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's very important for folks to hear stories like yours, where you've gone through lottery attempts, were selected, but failed application due to certain complexities. And as I always talk about here on this platform a lot, you have to have a good immigration attorney, but understand immigration attorneys here in the U.S. work for the employer. And I think a lot of folks, don't realize that as they work through the process. So, Arif, what I want to do now is there was just a couple things I wanted to ask you. I know you briefly alluded to some updates that could be coming out by the end of the year, sometime maybe this winter. But I always like to ask, what do you think the hiring demands look like for Canada, as well as any potential changes, which you've already briefly hit on, to high in Canada for the remainder of 2023?
Yeah, so we'll start with the immigration piece. I think the 48-hour registration cap that was hit on the newly announced H1B program just demonstrates that there's still tremendous interest from folks in coming to Canada and finding a path here. So I think that remains really strong, and every indication is that Canada continues to and will actually become more supportive of immigration in tech and also in other fields as well. So late June is when they announced their specific tech talent strategy, which announced that H1B program, and announced the LMIA exempt program that will be, more details will be shared later this year. But it also announced the return to regular processing times for Global Talent Stream, which is where the majority of tech folks are able to come into the country on temporary foreign work permits if they have an employer. And so that, I think it was kind of the third headline behind some of the other announcements, but actually a big deal where, instead of things taking 3 to 6 months, it went back down to the 4 or 5 weeks that we're used to seeing, which is great. The other big thing that was announced and has now been implemented is category-specific express entry permanent residency draws. And so I know you've talked a lot about this on your channel around how Canada uses a points-based system, factoring in age, education, language skills, and work experience to figure out who they should grant permanent residency invitations to apply to. What they've done recently is actually add category-specific draws, which include STEM, healthcare, trades, agriculture, and construction within kind of the trades bucket. And the last one being French language as well. So what they're going to do is actually sub-select folks within the express entry pool. And if you are within one of those occupations for that category draw, you will be prioritized. And what that means is that you could potentially have a lower score and still get selected for PR. And so, this is really material. If you look at the average draws in the last few months, you've needed a score in the 480s to basically qualify. But some of these category specific draws, I've seen scores in the 430s and 460s, and actually for French language in the 300s. So, if you happen to have French language ability, or you happen to work in trades, health, or STEM, you should actually be advantaged in upcoming draws. And that, there will be the next one, I think, is actually going to be for trades with some of the construction fields that I had mentioned earlier. So all of this is to say that I think immigration will continue to increase in Canada, and I think it will become more and more friendly for especially those in STEM and tech-related fields as the tech challenge strategy bears out. In terms of hiring, I would say, similar to what you said, it is slower than it was. The downturn in the market has disproportionately impacted tech companies, and so funding is down for tech companies, which means that hiring is either frozen or down for tech companies. But I do think that this will turn around. Any of us who have been around long enough know that this is cyclical and that there are upturns and downturns, and tech tends to experience that in more extreme versions. So when things are down, tech is down more, but when things go up, it tends to go up more. And so, I'd expect in time, as we start to see the IPO market open up, funding start to open up again, hiring will reopen. And it doesn't mean that hiring is closed. There's still massive shortages. There's still tens of thousands of open positions, in Canada, and hundreds of thousands in the US for tech occupations. And within certain pockets like generative AI, which has gotten a ton of hype, there's still really, really high demand for folks. And for those with a lot of experience, like in data science or software engineering that have 5 to 8 years of experience, there's still really, really high demand. And so it's definitely not as crazy as it was at, the heights of 2020 and 2021, but there's still, a lot of demand there for those occupations.
Yeah, and if I look at, you talked about kind of the cycle, right? I think Canada was experiencing it a little earlier than we did here in the US. Just from my personal experience, you guys were probably more in that it started December, January. It felt like here in the US, yeah, there was waves of layoffs, but in terms of the slowing, the softening, it felt more February, March. And that generally is an 8 to 10 month cycle. So, for you guys, that puts you closer to the end of the year. For us, kind of in a similar, time frame, which I think will lead into a stronger 2024 is just, my forecasting. But no, I think that's a great point, Arif. I think that the interesting thing about the weighted values for certain categories and the overall points and lower than usual points being selected as part of the draws is very interesting. Definitely something to keep an eye on for future state as well. Arif, Raj had one question that I wanted you and I to take on, and then we'll work on wrapping this up here. He wanted to know our thoughts on if we thought that these actions that were taken, to on multiple petition frauds, which is basically these multiple registrations, if we think that that's why, I'm assuming reading in between the lines, that's why there were 77,600 selected in a second lottery, and that 188,000 total, as you mentioned, on over 750,000. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that that's a piece of it. If you actually go to the USCIS site where they announce the second lottery numbers as well as the number of total selections, it literally says there that based on evidence from the fiscal 23 and 24 cap seasons, USCIS has already undertaken extensive fraud investigations and denied and revoked petitions accordingly. And so I do think that, especially given the massive spike in registrations this year, especially multiple registrants, they added several paragraphs about, the potential punishments for doing so, and also some measures that they've taken. And so, it literally says that they believe that the decreased filing rate for the fiscal 2024 cap is indicative of these investigations, that they're having an impact. So they're basically saying that is driving this. And so
Yeah.
the answer to that, I think, is yes.
Yeah, and I think too, to add a little color behind that, I think a lot of it too, what's more unspoken on the individual side and maybe even employer side is this fear of, even though I have a legit application, I know I have an individual who potentially had multiple registrations. Is that going to create a notice of intent to deny? And am I going to spend thousands of dollars on an application for an individual who potentially had multiple registrations and there's just a blanket denial? So I think that's why, to me, you're seeing this an exorbitant amount of additional registrations. I mean, I'm still speechless by it, Arf. I'm not going to lie. 77,000 in a second lottery when there's only 85,000 slots. It tells me that even in this 75,000, they're probably expecting a less than 50% application rate, which is crazy if you think about the number just keeps going up. And that's where, very clearly the H1B lottery system, when they decided to go to this electronic registration, was for the betterment of the individual and the petitioners, the employers. But it's created a gap for a lot of companies to exploit the system. And unfortunately, desperation in individuals, folks who may be going out of status like Neil, right, are willing to have multiple employers sponsor them because it increases their odds, even if only by a very small percentage. And so, very clearly the need for reform is necessary. But one of the constant themes that we have here on this channel is that if the U.S. is your number one choice for destination, that's great, but you need to understand your options. If you come that, you're going to basically expire, right? You're going to run out of time. You're not going to have any time remaining, whether that's on an OPT or whether that's on an H1B. You need to know what your options are. And from a quality of life perspective, from really a lifestyle and cultural perspective, this is where Canada makes the most sense. It makes the most sense from time zones. It makes the most sense from comparable compensation, as well as cost of living expenses. The pathway to permanent residency through GTS and express entry is clearly defined. It's something, Arf, I know you guys have had a lot of success with your employees and going through, and you have a proven track record that you can show to folks like Neil that says, look, we're here to help you. We're here to help your employer. And we'd love to welcome you. So I really appreciate both of you joining in here today. One thing I did want to mention, Arf, and you talked about earlier, if you do want to find out more about Mob Squad, please be sure to use the link in the video. If you go to Mob Squad directly, let them know you heard about them from here on the H1B Guy channel. That will help you go to the front of the line. Okay, so make sure that you let folks know where you heard about them from here from the H1B Guy. But before we close out, Neil, really appreciate you taking time to join us here this afternoon and to share your story. I'm glad to hear that you are thriving in Canada and that everything has worked out for you. Arif, as I've always told you, greatly appreciate your partnership and your support. Our alignment here is mutual, and always enjoy having you on. Look forward to potentially having you on, as you mentioned, maybe towards the end of the year to talk about some of the changes as the details come out. And we find out more on the tech talent strategy, that third bullet that you alluded to. So thank you so much, Arif. Really appreciate you coming on again here today as well. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and just wanted to let everyone know, again, today's live stream was brought to you exclusively by Mob Squad. Are you a technology professional facing U.S. work visa related challenges? Don't leave your fate up to chance. Our partner, Mob Squad, has a solution. Mob Squad helps technology professionals facing U.S. work visa-related uncertainty remain working with their current U.S. employer nearshore from Canada, as well as technology professionals from around the world who are seeking to find a rewarding opportunity in North America. Through their partnership with the Canadian government, they can obtain a Canadian work permit for you and your spouse in as little as 4 to 6 weeks. So whether you're looking to stay working with your current U.S. company or you want to find a new opportunity in Canada, Please find out how the team at MobSquad can help you via the link in the video description below. Join the squad. And again, also like to thank our partners, PERM-ads.com, as well as Path to Canada and Syndesus. So with that being said, I'd like to thank everyone who took time to join us here today. We really appreciate you jumping in here on this live stream. One last time, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube, and click the bell for notifications. Again, Neil, Arif, thank you so much for your time. I'm Robert. I'm the H1B Guy, your global source for all things H1B.
Thank you, Robert.
All right, Neil.